He spoke those words the way you'd call in a food order, completely unapologetic and certain. There was no pause or embarrassment in his voice. 75% was set aside for my younger brother Colby's future, and the remaining 25% was reserved for my father. That was all there was to it. The only sounds that filled the kitchen were the ticking of the wall clock and the soft, steady plop of a faucet I'd asked him to fix 2 months ago. My father reclined in his seat, fingers interlaced over his belly as if he were a monarch resolving obligations. My younger brother was somewhere further down the hallway, most likely lying in his room, headphones on while scrolling for sneakers he couldn't buy with the money he personally brought in. My attention turned to my father, still in his familiar stained tee, wearing that same look like he was waiting for me to say something. I stirred my mug of coffee and kept quiet for quite a while. He assumed I was calculating, that I'd object or try to negotiate. Instead, I burst out laughing, a sound so sharp and abrupt it startled even me. He just stared, blinking. Then he asked, "What's so amusing?" I brushed my fingertip against my eye. "Nothing," I replied. "It's just that I have spent years giving both of you the best parts of myself. My time, my money, and my willingness to keep quiet. Now you believe you can split me up as if I were an itemized list of errands." My father straightened up. "We're family. My younger brother needs to go to school. I still have to keep this house going. This isn't all that difficult, Daniela. You always have more than you need." "No," I replied, rising to my feet. "It's you who have taken more than enough from me." I grabbed my mug and walked toward my bedroom. His voice trailed after me. "You're just being over the top." I didn't respond. I didn't feel obligated to put on a show for him. Once I was in my bedroom, I slid open my closet and reached for a suitcase. Not because I was planning to leave that night, but because something significant had changed inside me. It wasn't a flash of anger, but rather a sensation both colder and more controlled. The type of emotion that doesn't just fizzle away, the sort of feeling that turns into action. I closed the suitcase and left it by the door. At that moment, I realized that my future wasn't about staying, but about recognizing when I stopped seeking permission to leave. The evening my mother moved out, she promised it wouldn't be permanent. She stood by the doorway clutching a rolling suitcase, her hair pulled tightly back and her voice drawn even tighter still. "Just for a couple of months," she told me. "I'll send some money. We'll catch up." She pressed her lips to my cheek, more like she was doing me a favor than saying farewell. I was 17. My younger brother was 15. My father didn't even get up to see her off. He just sat on the sofa changing channels, as if it wasn't important. Those couple of months stretched into 18 months, then 6 years. After that, we stopped counting the days. When I turned 17, I could prepare my younger brother Colby's favorite breakfast, finish his school paperwork, take his temperature, and make sure the electricity stayed on. You could call it stepping up, but to me it seemed more like being pulled forward as everyone else retreated. My father quit working not long after my mother, Sarah Correa, moved out. He claimed his back was giving him trouble. After that, it shifted to his knees. Then he'd say, "Why should I work hard when my mother sends cash?" In time, even those payments slowed down, but he still refused to do anything. When I turned 20, I began working at Wilhelm's Outfitters folding shirts. My first payday arrived. My father simply extended his hand, saying, "We're a team here." I handed it over. That money went to rent, groceries, cable, beer, whatever was needed. It kept the house functioning and kept my younger brother, Colby Mercado, in his chair. Colby was always the favorite, the artistic one, constantly wanting the latest headphones, newer phones, or shoes that cost more than what I made in a week. I once tried to bring up with my father whether my younger brother should pitch in as well. He just laughed and popped open another beer. "Let your younger brother live. You already got your shot." I couldn't figure out what he was trying to say. My chances at rest, school, and peace in that house were slim. The walls were so thin I could hear everything. I caught every sound. My younger brother Colby sneaking in past curfew. My father Richard talking about me as if I were some severe spouse rather than his own daughter. He made it sound as though my strictness was a problem. Never mind that it was the only thing keeping us from drowning in bills. I recall one time, standing in the hallway clutching a damp towel, eavesdropping on them as they laughed at some foolish thing. I felt like a spirit, still alive, still present, but completely unseen. Even so, I stayed because I believed that's what it meant to be family. You support the roof, no matter how much weight it presses onto your shoulders. But maybe I never really held it up. Maybe I was just standing underneath, waiting for it to collapse. That suitcase near the entryway. The feeling wasn't fear anymore. It was an omen. And the next day, I heard something that made my decision even clearer. I never intended to stay at the job for that long. It began as just an escape route, any possible exit. An entry-level inventory assistant role at Northline Provisions. I arrived before my shift, lingered after, and expressed gratitude far more than was required. 6 years in, I climbed to logistics lead, and then to a supervisor position. Once I'd reached 8 years, I was overseeing regional deliveries and leading people who used to call me the kid. The salary increases came slowly but reliably. They weren't showy or dramatic, but after a while, the earnings stacked up, though still, I never shared it at home. Each payday, I withdrew the same sum I used to earn when I was 20. I passed it to my father in a plain envelope, letting him assume that was the full amount. Occasionally, he would give a nod or grunt out a thanks if I was feeling reasonably okay. Colby never bothered to ask where I was employed. I doubt he even remembered the name of Northline Provisions. I set up a new savings account with a different bank and a login my father would never figure out. The balance started out modestly, just several $100s, and eventually grew into a few thousand. I found myself watching the account totals increase, the same way others might gaze at the shifting tides. At the house, everything stayed exactly as it had been. The cracked floor tile remained, that worn-out sofa was still there, and the empty promises continued. I started mentioning needing overtime or having my hours cut whenever I needed time to myself, and nobody ever questioned my excuses. Maybe they just didn't care enough to ask. I usually ate my lunch by myself, but every so often, I bumped into Celeste from Cascade Staffing Solutions during a break. Back before her promotion, we had worked side by side on the floor. She gave me a grin as soon as she spotted me. "Still hanging in there?" she teased. "More or less," I replied. She leaned closer, her tone turning more earnest. "You've got a good mind. But girl, you act like that family is a burden only you can carry." I didn't reply. I just slowed down chewing. She studied me briefly. Then she told me love isn't meant to feel like I'm a servant. I laughed, because that's how I cope when someone's words land too close to home. Still, her words lingered with me as I drove back, as I sorted laundry, as I pretended not to hear my younger brother through the wall, calling out for another $35 for some urgent reason. Later that night, I moved more into the savings account. I realized I was saving more than just money. I was putting away possibilities. And several days later, after I unintentionally left something on my desk, those possibilities became visible to others faster than I expected. It was an error, a minor one, not typical for me. I had printed a recent pay stub for a bank confirmation, and instead of slipping it into the drawer, I left it sitting on my desk. Later, I tucked it into my usual folder beneath my mattress. I promised myself I'd put it away that night, but when I finally got home late, I carelessly tossed my bag on the bed and forgot all about it. The following morning, my younger brother stood in the hallway, arms folded, his face reddening with a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is what they pay you?" my younger brother demanded, waving the paper around as if it were proof that I'd done something wrong. I stayed silent because he already understood. "So, while we're barely making it, you've been stashing money away?" My younger brother's voice wavered, caught between wanting to break down or shout. I simply brushed past him. "That's not something you need to worry about." But he didn't let it go. "You stay here, don't you? You eat our food, you lounge on our couch, and all this time you've been hiding money." Before I had a chance to reply, my father was seated at the kitchen table, reading over the pay stub himself. My father's eyes narrowed in suspicion. "This legit?" he asked. I gave him a single nod. He brought his hand down onto the table with a smack. "You're so selfish. Your younger brother wants to go to college. I need someone to help me maintain this house. And here I am, saving money while acting like we're barely getting by." "You never asked," I replied softly. "You just assumed I'd stay poor because it worked out better for you." My father stood there with his chest puffed out, like that used to mean something important. "Well, that's all changing. From now on, 75% of that goes to my younger brother. He has hopes, he has a future, and the other 25%, I deserve that for holding this family together." The quiet in the room felt suffocating, as if a lid were sealing over something boiling. I glanced over at Colby. He didn't move a muscle. In fact, he wore an expression of pride. That's when everything shifted. It wasn't rage or fear, just an absolute stillness, as if time suddenly paused. Something within me went quiet. Not the kind of silence that keeps conflict away, but the sort that forges barriers. I didn't fight, didn't raise my voice. I just made my way to my bedroom and closed the door. If they believed money equaled power, they were about to discover the consequences when the person holding everything together finally let go. When the sun came up, I went straight to the closet and dragged the suitcase out onto the floor. I packed carefully and slowly, not out of hesitation, but to be present for every crease, every movement of the zipper. What I was doing went beyond just putting things into a suitcase. I was claiming my own possessions. I gathered the discounted clothes I had chosen, a chipped mug from when I earned my first promotion, and the private journal no one else knew existed. I didn't bring much, only what I needed to make a start. Everything else I left there: the faded blankets, the guilt handed down to me, and the stories spun about who I was meant to become. As midnight came, quiet settled over the home. My younger brother's bedroom door was closed. My father had fallen asleep on the living room couch, the TV casting a blue glow on his features. I quietly took the old house keys and set my ring down on the kitchen counter beside me. There was nothing. No goodbye. No message. I was nearly at the door when he began to wake. His eyes cracked open and then narrowed into a glare. "Where do you think you're headed?" I kept moving forward, not pausing. He pushed himself upright. "You're leaving your family behind." That word again. Family. As if it should have been enough to keep me anchored. I grabbed the doorknob, pausing to glance back at him over my shoulder. No. I was freeing myself from the illusion that I ever truly belonged to one. He got to his feet, swaying but furious. "You'll end up coming back, begging. Don't count on us waiting for you." I stayed silent, offering no response. Outside, the air was crisp and undramatic. There wasn't a storm or any loud noises, only the sound of my boots tapping against the driveway, and the measured breath of the night surrounding me. I drove to the modest studio I'd secured, having already paid the first and last month's rent for a peaceful corner space above the closed Sweetfinch Bakery. The stairs groaned beneath my feet, and the walls were overdue for a coat of paint. But at last, the place belonged to me. I lowered my suitcase to the floor, sat down, and rested my back against the wall. There was no shouting echoing from a nearby room. Nobody called out to ask about missing cash, leaving the air filled with nothing but quiet. This wasn't the type of silence that once made me uneasy, but rather the kind that finally let me listen to my own thoughts. On Tuesday morning, I purchased a proper mattress. Not luxurious, but at least it stayed firm in the center. Using a bargain drip coffee maker, I brewed myself a cup and sipped it while sitting on the floor. The taste reminded me of something I hadn't realized I'd been longing for. That night, I managed to sleep straight through for the first time in what felt like forever. Then, 2 months down the line, when the phone rang right before midnight, I nearly let it go unanswered. The clock read 10:46 p.m. As I stood in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, and half focused on an old playlist murmuring from a speaker in the corner, the phone rang. There was no caller ID, but something about the call made me know exactly who it had to be. I let the call go to voicemail. After that, my phone rang again. On the third try, I finally picked up. My voice was strained and pleading as I begged not to be hung up on, but I stayed silent. "We're being evicted," I blurted out. The warning was definite. "They're showing up on Tuesday," I continued. We'd believed there was still more time. However, my voice faltered. "We don't have anywhere else to go," I admitted. I lowered myself onto my bed, a towel still slung around my shoulders. "Please," I pleaded once more. "You have money. You could help us just for this month," I asked. "If you do, we'll manage somehow after that." There was a moment of silence. Suddenly, someone else snatched the phone. "Richard Mercado, you think you can just leave and let us go under?" His tone was filled with the same heat he used whenever dinner wasn't on the table on time, or I forgot to fold the towels the way he wanted. They told me, "We provided you with a house, shelter, and a family. You owe us." I nearly burst out laughing. Not because it amused me, but because the deceit was so overused that it couldn't keep its form anymore. "I'm the one who purchased the groceries," I responded. "I'm the one who covered the utility costs. That shelter stayed standing because I kept giving you my wages and keeping quiet." He attempted to interrupt, but I pressed on. "What you offered me was silence. What you gave me was humiliation. You handed me 100 justifications to walk away, without a single reason for me to return." There was a moment of shocked stillness. "You're not like this," Colby murmured in the background. "You've always been the one who kept things together." "That's right. I said I kept it. Now you get to see what happens when I finally release it." Then I ended the call. The quiet that followed didn't seem harsh. It felt deserved. And 10 days later, when another call came, this time with a Colorado area code, I didn't recognize the number until I heard her voice. The voice sounded older than I remembered. Slower, but with a sharpness that remained. As if the years had worn down her edges but hadn't truly changed her. "Daniela," she said. "It's your mother, Sarah." I didn't respond. She let out a sigh. "I found out what happened. My father and my younger brother told me. How could you walk away from them like that?" My jaw stiffened. "You really want to know why?" "Don't get defensive," she interrupted. I'm just trying to make sense of it. They're a part of you." "No," I replied. "They were your family. I was only the substitute, the backup for when you left and never returned." She paused, silent for a breath. Then, trying to stay measured, I said, "I had to go. You know I did it for both of us." "You did it because of money," I said. "And maybe that's not right. But you didn't call on our birthdays. You didn't come back when my younger brother flunked 2 grades, or when I came down with pneumonia. You never asked if I was all right. You only wanted to know if the bills had been taken care of." "That isn't correct." "It is," I replied. "And I did everything you wanted. I kept the family together. I stayed even when I shouldn't have. I brought up my younger brother while our father, Richard Mercado, drank, And all you did was send checks from an anonymous address. And now you want to question why I walked away." She drew in a sudden breath. "Still, you should have stayed." Those words struck me more deeply than the silence that had come before. Not because they were unexpected, but precisely because they weren't. I stared at the wall ahead of me. I wasn't angry, not even upset, just finished. "I'm not the substitute for you. I told you I was your daughter. Now I'm just finished. I didn't stay for the rest." I hung up, ended the call, and then scrolled to my mother's contact, holding it down before selecting the block option. There was no sense of triumph or empowerment, only the quiet ease of having one less burden to shoulder. Later that evening, I brewed myself some tea. I perched by the window, leaving the curtain drawn back to observe the glow of the street lamps as they flickered on. When it was time for bed, I lay down with both arms resting above my blankets, as though I no longer had anything to protect. When I awoke the next morning, I logged into my savings account and transferred a modest amount to my travel fund. Lately, Colorado had been on my mind. And exactly 18 months from the night I walked out, I promised myself I would finally confront the question that used to frighten me. What does it really feel like to have a life that is truly my own? Now, 18 months have passed. My younger brother, Colby Mercado, spends his days working at Colfax Tire Garage and delivers groceries in the evenings. Richard Mercado drives for Uber early in the day and spends the afternoons catching up on sleep. They relocated to a smaller apartment near the bus depot. There was no backyard, no sofa, no beer fridge, just bare walls and rent to pay. I didn't find out by asking. I learned all this because online silence never stops people from sharing. The posts arrive like tiny postcards. I never chose to be tagged in a photo here or in a string of complaints over there. These days, they're just getting by. Not out of personal growth, but simply because circumstances have left them no other options. As for me, I still live in the small apartment above Sweetfinch Bakery. The paint still flakes from the walls, but all the books on my shelf belong to me alone. The mornings are mine as well, gentle, unhurried, filled with lavender tea and sunlight streaming past the curtains. I filled my space with even more plants. They never respond, never ask for anything. With just some water, they quietly keep growing. On Sundays, I stroll to the farmer's market and pick out vegetables. I often find myself uncertain about how to prepare meals and eat breakfast on my own, without feeling the need to justify why that is enough. I no longer make trips back home for celebrations. I don't share updates. I don't reach out by phone. Some might view that as distant, but to me, it simply feels honest. Sometimes I keep a journal. Not every day, but on those occasions when the quiet feels vast and brimming instead of hollow, I jot down the truths I never felt ready to voice. For example, someone once wrote, "Peace is forgiveness." Yet to me, it's more about not having to offer explanations any longer. I read over that sentence again yesterday evening and had a realization. They didn't truly care for me. They cared for the part of me who constantly gave, never refused, and stepped in to help without invitation. But I am no longer that person. These days, I assert myself, I walk away. I refuse to make myself smaller to fit in. I know that I'm not waiting for anyone to figure me out. I am simply anticipating whatever comes next,